Here's why Aemond betrayed his own blood by unleashing Vhagar at Storm's End. In the annals of Targaryen history, few acts are remembered as vividly, or as tragically, as the moment Aemond Targaryen unleashed Vhagar upon Storm's End. To some, it was a decisive strike in the brutal calculus of the Targaryen civil war. To others, it was a betrayal of family, honor, and the very blood that bound him to those he attacked. The question that echoes through the ages is as haunting as it is dramatic. Why did Aemond betray his own blood in such a devastating way? Today, we dive deep into the mind, motives, and consequences of Aemond's fateful decision, examining why unleashing Vhagar at Storm's End was more than a tactical maneuver. It was a personal, political, and emotional statement that reshaped the course of the Dance of the Dragons. To understand Aemond's actions, we must first consider the broader context of the Targaryen civil war. The realm was fractured, torn between the Blacks and the Greens, and loyalties were as fluid as they were perilous. Aemond, riding the formidable Vhagar, was a key player in this brutal conflict, embodying the fierce ambition, pride, and martial prowess that defined his faction. His choice to confront the defenders of Storm's End, particularly in a manner that targeted kin, was not made lightly, yet it was steeped in the complexities of family rivalry, political strategy, and the intense personal vendettas that fueled the war. Storm's End itself was a fortress of symbolic and strategic importance. As the ancestral seat of House Baratheon, its control represented both military advantage and political leverage. For Aemond, capturing or subduing Storm's End was not merely a tactical necessity, it was a statement of dominance, a warning to the realm, and a demonstration of the might of dragon and rider. Yet this was no ordinary siege. The castle was held by forces loyal to his own kin, raising profound questions about loyalty, blood ties, and the ruthless choices demanded by war. At the heart of this conflict lay a deeply personal motivation: Aemond's rivalry with his family, particularly his nephew Lucerys Velaryon and other members of the Black faction. While the Targaryens were bound by blood, the civil war had fractured these bonds, replacing familial loyalty with suspicion, ambition, and vengeance. Aemond's decision to unleash Vhagar at Storm's End was as much about personal vendetta as it was about military necessity. By striking at his own blood, he asserted dominance, punished perceived betrayals, and underscored the seriousness of his resolve in the war. The act itself, sending Vhagar, one of the most fearsome dragons in Westeros, against Storm's End, was both audacious and calculated. Dragons in the Targaryen world are not mere weapons, they are extensions of the rider's will, symbols of power, and instruments of terror. To employ Vhagar against one's own kin is an escalation that carries both physical and symbolic weight. Aemond understood this intimately. By choosing Vhagar as his instrument, he transformed a strategic attack into a deeply personal message. Blood ties may exist, but loyalty and ambition often outweigh them in the pursuit of power. One reason Aemond's actions were perceived as a betrayal lies in the human cost. Members of the Black faction at Storm's End were not just political opponents, they were relatives, allies, and, in some cases, friends. The unleashing of Vhagar threatened lives, homes, and the very continuity of the families involved. For Aemond, this was a necessary sacrifice, but for Rhaenyra, Lucerys, and others, it was a stark reminder that the bonds of blood offered no protection in a war defined by ambition and vengeance. The betrayal was not abstract, it was immediate, tangible, and devastating. Another factor that deepened the perception of betrayal was the element of surprise and decisiveness. Aemond did not engage in prolonged negotiation or subtle intimidation. Instead, he acted swiftly, decisively, and with overwhelming force. The sudden appearance of Vhagar in the skies above Storm's End, breathing fire and asserting dominance, was a psychological as well as a physical assault. It sent a clear message to allies and enemies alike: Aemond Targaryen would not hesitate to act against kin, and any reliance on blood ties as a safeguard was dangerously misplaced. Political ambition also played a crucial role. Aemond was aware that the civil war was as much about perception as it was about conquest. By striking Storm's End with Vhagar, he demonstrated not only his personal strength but the might of the Green faction and the Targaryen dragons. This act elevated his status, reinforced his authority, and sent a warning to any who might consider defying him. In a world where power is measured by action and influence, hesitation or perceived weakness can be fatal. Aemond's betrayal was thus a calculated assertion of power, meant to reinforce his position both within the family and across the realm. Yet the emotional and psychological dimensions cannot be ignored. Aemond's choice was fueled not only by ambition but by deep-seated resentment and rivalry. The civil war had intensified old grievances, magnified slights, and transformed interpersonal conflicts into existential struggles. His actions at Storm's End were a culmination of these tensions, a manifestation of anger, pride, and the desire to assert control in a world that constantly challenged his authority. To unleash Vhagar against kin was to externalize these internal conflicts in a dramatic, irreversible way. Moreover, the Council of Advisors and key figures supporting Aemond played a subtle but significant role. They guided strategy, weighed risks, and encouraged decisive action, framing the attack as both militarily advantageous and politically symbolic. While Aemond was the face and agent of the betrayal, the environment around him reinforced the logic, or at least the perceived necessity, of using Vhagar in such a direct and destructive manner. The betrayal was therefore both personal and systemic, reflecting the pressures, calculations, and incentives of a war in which loyalty was conditional and survival often demanded ruthless choices. The consequences of Aemond's decision were immediate and far-reaching. Storm's End suffered extensive damage, with lives lost and families disrupted. The shockwaves of his actions reverberated throughout Westeros, reshaping alliances, inspiring fear, and demonstrating the lethal potential of dragon warfare. Yet perhaps the most enduring consequence was the deep fracture in familial bonds. Rhaenyra and her supporters saw the attack as proof that even blood could not restrain ambition, that loyalty was conditional, and that the stakes of the civil war had escalated beyond negotiation, compromise, or sentiment. This betrayal also illustrates the complex morality of Targaryen politics. In a dynasty defined by dragons, ambition, and the ruthless pursuit of power, decisions are rarely clear-cut. Aemond's choice to attack kin with Vhagar can be viewed simultaneously as a strategic necessity and a moral transgression. To some, he acted as a competent and decisive military leader; to others, he committed an unforgivable violation of familial trust. This tension between duty, ambition, and morality is central to understanding both Aemond as an individual and the broader dynamics of Targaryen history. Aemond's use of Vhagar also highlights the symbolic dimension of dragons in the Targaryen civil war. Dragons are not just weapons; they are living extensions of the rider's power, embodiments of dominance, and instruments of fear. By unleashing Vhagar, Aemond transformed a political and military maneuver into a psychological statement. The sky above Storm's End became a theater of terror, where the symbolic power of dragonfire underscored the consequences of defiance and the fragility of familial loyalty in the midst of war. The betrayal is further compounded by the context of Aemond's own ambitions. As a Targaryen prince, he was driven by a desire for recognition, influence, and authority. He sought to demonstrate that he was a force to be reckoned with, capable of decisive action in moments of crisis. Attacking Storm's End with Vhagar allowed him to assert this identity, showcasing both his strategic acumen and his willingness to act where others might hesitate. In doing so, he prioritized personal ambition over kinship, reinforcing the perception of betrayal even as he solidified his own position. From a strategic standpoint, the decision also had clear advantages. Storm's End was a formidable stronghold, and a direct assault using traditional forces might have resulted in prolonged siege, heavy losses, and uncertain outcomes. By